Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't already, check out my region intro video where I introduce some of the lore of my region. In that intro video, I introduce my starter Pokemon, and in this video, I'll be telling the thought process behind their designs. The entire idea of basing my region off Greek myth actually started with trying to come up with a cohesive starter trio. If you can believe it, I started sketching ideas for this project in the summer of 2019. By then, we had two starter trios who shared a theme. X and Y starters had a medieval archetype RPG theme, and the Sun and Moon starters had a loose circus theme. So while speculating what Sword and Shield starters would have in common, I got to thinking about original concept and figured a starter trio based on Greek mythological creatures would make a compelling trio. A small disclaimer before I continue, I am not a professional artist. I did not go to school for illustration. I am very much on my own artistic journey, and that means my rendering will not be consistent design to design. More on this when I get to individual designs. Back to my starters. For the most part, I had a clear idea of what the final evolutions were going to look like, so the real process became giving each line solid designs that build up to the third stage. I personally like when each stage of a Pokemon line looks a little different from each other, but still follows a consistent theme. I'll be revealing the start evolutions stage by stage, as if I was Game Freak revealing them leading up to a game's release. I would actually love to know if anyone changed their starter picks as I reveal each consecutive stage. Starting off with the first stages, in my opinion, the first stages are so fun to design. They can be very simple and cute, but have features that will eventually turn into recognizable characteristics of their final evolutions. As y'all are familiar with these first stages, let's just jump right in. Starting off with Groblin. As you can tell from the timelines, I had a previous version of Groblin. I had done this render on Photoshop using a Wacom tablet, but using Procreate on an iPad made me change my approach a bit, and I ended up with a design I don't think I would have arrived at if it weren't for these new tools. I just think it speaks to the artistic process how different mediums result in different outcomes. I meant for each starter to represent the quality of young children, and for Groblin I chose curiosity. Groblins are very curious about nature, humanity, and their place within everything, and they wander around interacting with everything they can get their hands on. I'm actually very satisfied with my design for Groblin, and I think the gnome aesthetic is perfect for a curious, garden-loving Pokemon. Its Pokedex entry reads, Groblins love to tend to gardens. Recent interactions with humans have inspired Groblins to grow plants as clothing. Groblin's name comes from a combination of grow and Groblin. Groblin's line has the power to influence the growth of vegetation, so I had their name reflect this. Now on to Calfpint. After watching the first video, I could probably tell what you guys were thinking. Oh wow, a calf starter in a Greek-themed region? I wonder what this will turn into. In all seriousness, I feel like I made some unique design choices that will set my fire starter apart from other similar designs. Calfpint's personality is meant to represent temper tantrums young children have, and as we all know, full-grown bulls are known to be cantankerous. I feel like Calfpint's design doesn't have a lot going on, but I'm happy with how this design has progressed. An early iteration of this design didn't have the flame tail, which seems baffling looking back at it now, since Cowtails looks so much like a simple flame. Its text entry reads, while normally social and docile Pokemon, Calfpints are known for their bouts of temper tantrums that can heat up their tough-ass nails horns. Calfpint's name comes from a combination of calf and half pint, which can be used to describe a small animal, and this tiny calf Pokemon definitely fits that description. Additionally, its text entry is exemplified in one of the line's signature move, Iron Brand. It's a new 20 power steel type move that will always leave its opponent with a burn. This is obviously a reference to the practice of iron branding in which cows are usually subjected to. From this signature move, I bet you can tell what the final stage's secondary typing will be. But that's enough for the fire starter line for now. Now on to Kelpling. Kelpling's digital design actually hasn't changed a lot from the first time I digitally rendered it. It originally started off as a seahorse, but once I settled on the foal for its base, the design took form rather easily, which unfortunately I can't say for the rest of the line. I actually took a lot of inspiration from the baby Pegasus from the Hercules movie when designing Kelpling, and I think it worked really well for a baby first stage water starter. One thing I'll say about this design is that I feel like the colors are a touch too saturated and they should be adjusted a bit, but overall I love Kelpling's design. Its Pokedex entry reads, Kelplings are popular, high energy Pokemon. They'll happily splash along a coastline all day long. Kelpling comes from Kelpie and foaling. A Kelpie is a water spirit whose depictions are similar to the hippocampus that this mon is based off of. Now on to the middle stages. I'm actually a giant fan of middle stages in Pokemon as a whole. I actually kind of like that awkward teenage phase, so I actually put a lot of effort in my starter middle stages. Not that other artists don't, I just take that a few extra steps. Continuing with Groblin's theme of tending to gardens, their mushroom hat has now changed shapes to resemble a sun hat to cover this new stage's heads while they help grow vegetation. I'm a big observer of shape language, and I really want this stage to be seen as one of the friendliest designs of the starters, so I use very round shapes, since everyone knows round is a friendly shape. So here's our very first brand new design, Grogre. Its Pokedex entry reads, it enthusiastically shows others it's able to use tools to complete tasks. It's able to replant enough trees in one day to revitalize a small grove. Grogre's name comes from grow and ogre, Continuing the naming convention of Groblin, Grogre is a very chill Pokemon that gets along with everyone and will help wherever it can. Moving on to the second stage of the Fire Starter. This stage was actually the first design of the line I was very happy with. My vision was very clear when it came to this design. This design will continue Calfpint's temperament into a moody teenage phase. Highland cows are considered to be very cute animals, but maybe it's just me, but it kind of looks like they're going through an emo phase. Nonetheless, that's the direction I take this design in. And what do emo phases usually involve? That's right, piercings. Cows usually also have nose rings and ear tags, so having an emo-faced middle stage be a moody, punky cow just makes a lot of sense considering we basically all know by now what this month's secondary typing will be. The second stage actually has a decent amount of metal in its body already, and I've toyed with giving it its secondary typing in its second stage, but I haven't been able to commit to this idea. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. But anyways, for now, here's Bovvurn. Its Dex entry reads, Bovvurns are headstrong Pokemon that frequently disregard their trainer's instructions. Trainers must use a special heated brush to quell its defiant attitude. Bovvurn's name comes from a combination of bovine and burn. The structure is also meant to resemble the word stubborn. Bovvurn's Dex entry also references one of my favorite facts about cows, which is that they love being brushed. I would actually sell my soul to see this Pokemon in Pokemon ME/refresh. Now moving on to the second stage of the water starter. I'm actually not that happy with this design. Trying to recall my thought process at the time, I think I really liked the shape language I had going on for this stage. I felt all the triangles and sharp edges got across my original intent with the design, which is that it would become very aggressive when it evolved. I think I originally wanted Kelpling's hyperactivity to lead to the second stage accidentally hurting people and other Pokemon. This isn't a terrible concept for a design, but that change is a little abrupt and it doesn't really follow through between stages, while the other two starters have a more cohesive thread throughout their lines. Additionally, I didn't originally plan for seashells to be such a big part of this line's visuals, but they ended up being crucial in coming up with a final stage I was very happy with. Kelpling was easy enough to add seashells into their design since their fins already kind of look like scallop shells. On the other hand, the second stage's seashells aren't very cohesive with the rest of the design because they were very literally tacked on at the last minute. I'd love to revisit the design at a later date and see how I can amend it so it falls in line a little better with the rest of the evolutionary family. But for now, here's Neptide. Its Pokedex entry reads, upon evolution, Neptide develops a mean streak. It relentlessly attacks its opponents with waves of crashing tides to force its opponents to yield. Neptide comes from Neptune and Tide. Neptune, of course, comes from the Roman version of Poseidon. Neptide draws on the classic imagery of a hippocampus, which are often seen drawing Poseidon's sea chariot. Finally, we're going to be able to see the final evolutions of our starter Pokemon, starting off with our grass starter. With all the nature the Groblin line has tended to, there's gotta be something to help defend it, and that's where their final evolution comes into play. Groblin went from growing clothing and simple tools to growing mushroom weapons that help them fight. And surprise, the whole line has led to a Cyclops design. If you guys were wondering, both Groblin and Grogre also only have one eye, but it's obscured by their clothing and their hair. As I said earlier, I personally like when a Pokemon line actually changes concepts throughout the evolution instead of being only one thing, and tacking things on as the line progresses. So I'm very pleased with how this line has developed. Meet Cyclobber. Its Pokedex entry reads, a fierce protector of the environment. It uses an arsenal of weapons it's able to grow in order to vanquish any foe that attempts to bring harm to its home. Cyclobber's mushroom weapons are a reference to how in Greek myth, the Cyclopses are responsible for building some of the Olympians' most iconic weaponry. I felt like an interesting way to convey this was with the grass type that can use their elemental powers to summon plant armaments. It's able to use these two weapons with two new moves I created for this line called Druid's Wrath, which is Cyclobber's signature move, and Shroom Shield, which if this was a real game could be learned by other Pokemon. I've made several other moves for this line since I didn't feel like the current move pool in Pokemon fit this line. These moves include Shroom Shot, a low power early grass type move, Fairy Ring, Pixie Punch, etc. I could go into more detail in the new moves I created for fun, but I need to focus on the starters for this video. You've probably noticed by now that the Groblin line has an ability not found in Pokemon. Nature's Guardian is an original signature ability I've come up with the grass starter line. I personally love both grass and fairy types. I've noticed a lot of Pokemon carry coverage against both of these types. Its 4-time weakness to poison type moves is very condemning considering the amount of Pokemon that can learn things like Sludge Bomb and Poison Jab. Nature's Guardian is my way of addressing this glaring weakness by allowing the Groblin line to nullify any attack that is effective towards grass types for itself or an ally on the field. This would only work once each time the Pokemon enters the battle. With all 3 stages revealed, I like to go back and talk about the line as a whole. A few things have inspired their concept. Grass type starters usually have a prehistoric theme. The Groblin line is inspired by cavemen and their process of using tools. It seemed like a clear direction to take a line that would eventually turn into a Cyclops, since there's a lot of similarities in clothing between mythological humanoids and primitive man. There's another prehistoric connection that can be made, which won't be a surprise to paleo nerds, and this is that the belief that the myth of the Cyclops came about when ancient Greeks found elephant skulls that look like a giant one-eyed humanoid. I probably have had the most to say about this line, and that's probably because on top of being my favorite of the starters, this line is probably the one I've spent the most time with so far. I actually have multiple iterations to compare, so it's fun looking back and seeing how far this line has come. Cyclobber is my personal pick of the starters, but let's see how he holds up compared to the rest of the final evolutions. The Fire Starter's final stage is inspired by those emo punky kids who never really grew out of that phase, but adopted a more mature version of it that's very rock and roll. I'm actually kind of jealous of them because I used to have a septum and industrial piercing, and I love the way I looked in them. My ear did grow keloid from it, so maybe do listen to your parents when they say don't get that piercing. This mon does capture a lot about me, surprisingly, because as you probably could tell from my avatar, I did have a fiery red mane for hair. Although I think there's some things that could be tweaked and cleaned up about the design, I'm very happy with it. I know Minotaurs are a dime a dozen when it comes to Greek myth regions, but I like my take, pairing this classic monster with a rebellious punky aesthetic, since I'm sure the creature of myth would have wanted to rebel against the king who imprisoned it. Introducing Calamitaur. Its text entry reads, in ancient times, Calamitaur's rage was uncontrollable. Because of this, the species was sealed off for a brief period. The markings on their bodies serve as a reminder of this and calm most of their temper. Its name is a combination of Calamity and Minotaur. Calamity comes from the great destruction this species of Pokemon inflicted across the region before it was sealed away. It might be strange it still has markings from the time it was imprisoned, but man-made items used to control an aspect of a Pokemon's biology isn't unheard of in Pokemon. Machoke and Machamp both have belts that control their strength. Although its temper is mostly subdued, it can still unleash it in battle. Most notably, while it uses its signature move, Juggernaut. This is an original steel type attack with 80 power and can ignore, protect, and substitute and lift the effect of those moves. A fun little fact about this line is that it actually fits pretty well in the Chinese zodiac theory most fire starters fall in. Even if it's not a strict requirement, it's still a fun trend to continue. The design for the final evolution of the water starter. This design for some reason was the hardest to nail out of all the stages of each starter line. For some reason, I couldn't come up with something I was happy with. There were a lot of things contributing to this feeling of dissatisfaction, and I think it all boiled down to the pressure I was putting myself under. I'm a bit too cerebral for my own good, and I think too much about things like existing water starter conventions, what my gimmick is going to look like down the line, and how far I can take the design without overstepping into said gimmick. I had nearly given up on this concept and pivoted to another when Crimson from Curious Chaos took a swing at the design and something just clicked. It somehow made me realize I actually really like this design and I should stick with it. Admittedly, I basically just traced over his sketch, but how could I not with such a talented artist taking a stab at my concept? Sometimes it really just takes another perspective to see the merit of your own ideas, because now I'm absolutely in love with the design. So here's Horseidon. Its text entry reads, Horseidons are known for their grace, speed, and power. They are seen running on the crest of waves surveying the ocean. They'll help any Pokemon or human that are drowning. The name is a portmanteau of horse and Poseidon. It's one of the sillier names in my Pokedex, but I stand by it proudly. This concept is inspired by some myths detailing Poseidon as the creator of horses. Myths often differ. In one version, he created them out of the crest of waves and sea foam. To include this visual, I made Horseidon's mane into a wave of water. This was originally supposed to be just a plain fish fin, but I feel like this change makes it more dynamic and a striking design. The seashell armor came from the depictions of Atlantean warriors in art that have them in seashell armor, denoting their status as warriors of the sea, which is what I ultimately wanted Horseidon to be. This is the justification for giving Horseidon the fighting type. It might be a little odd given that most fighting types are connected to specific form of martial arts, but for Horseidon, its fighting type falls more along the lines of Pokemon like the Swords of Justice. Its combat prowess is shown with its signature move, Atlantic Might. It's an 100 power physical fighting type move. It allows Horseidon to attack with the strength of a mythic underwater kingdom, and it has a 10% chance to boost all of its stats. So that's it for the Myraki region starters. Which starter are you choosing for your journey, and is it any different from your first choice? I'm actually kind of curious. Does anyone have an idea of what my gimmick could possibly be? I'd love to hear your answers down in the comments down below. In the next video, I'll be revealing what Pokemon you can find in the Myraki region's first route. I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to keep it odd.